Welcome to Living Fully, a podcast dedicated to enhancing your mental well-being. Each episode explores valuable insights and practical strategies to help you lead a more fulfilling life. I'm your host, Catherine Hertig. Transitioning to adulthood can be an exciting time. You're becoming more independent. The world is opening up to you. Are you going to go to school, travel, get a job? Having these choices can feel pretty great. But this time can also be quite stressful, especially now. I sat down with Psychologist Wardah Elahi to talk about the milestones of moving toward adulthood and the ways that young people can build up their mental health routine and coping skills toolbox. So, I'm here with Wardah Elahi.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Yes. Thank you for talking with me today.
Yeah, no worries. It definitely is a really good topic. And when I saw it, I was like, ooh, I want to talk about this for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's start. I mean, you were on the podcast a little while ago, but in case people don't remember, can you tell us a bit about who you are and your background?
Yeah, so my name is Wardah Elahi, and I have been working at Calgary Counseling for a while, since 2020. So it's been like 4 years, but I went through my internship here, and then I did my residency, and then now I'm a registered psychologist.
Excellent.
So yeah, and then primarily I work with every kind of population, but a lot of them are actually young adults and teenagers as well. And then, yeah, there's some people in their late 20s that come as well. So yeah, I have a good mix of clients. And yeah, so that's why I was excited to look into this topic more myself in detail, and then also talk about some of the experiences with that population.
For sure. Yeah, it sounds like you're going to have some good insight into what they're going through.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's get started. Or as young adults they end high school, they're entering into adulthood, what are some common potential mental health challenges that they may face?
Well, I feel like with this population, there's a lot that's going on all at once. There's so many changes. There's relationship changes, job changes, a lot of societal pressures to be kind of settled in and have an education or have a job or be independent. And so transition from this time can be very difficult to navigate. Even like if you're going from high school to college, right? Like that's a huge transition, whereas, you're kind of asking to go to the washroom in high school and then all of a sudden your profs don't really know your name, right?
Yeah.
Or even like if you choose not to go to college and you're just working or taking a gap year, that's still a huge transition.
Yeah, there's a lot more accountability there.
Exactly. So the exploration of this self-identity and values and also learning to be independent can actually bring about a lot of stigma when it comes to mental health, because young adults feel like they need to be independent. And so reaching out for help and things like that may be harder because they feel like they should
have it all together.
Or they could do this on their own. You know? And then, and it, like with other age groups, right? Like this is different because usually our identity is set through school or if we're outside of school, maybe in our later 20s, we found out a lot of things about ourselves by that point. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's this key gap in that space where we're kind of learning to swim, essentially.
Yeah, that uncertainty. Yeah, and you talked about like independence. So how can working towards that, maybe impact mental health? What steps do you think people can take to navigate that shift?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's positive and negative impacts to gaining independence, right? Like the positive would be it gives you a greater sense of control over your own life. It can be empowering. It can be great for self-esteem if now nobody's setting the rules for you or giving you curfew or whatever it is that your parents used to do. And then there's opportunities for personal growth and development when you take on new responsibilities. And you can also, like, since you're now venturing into the outside world, kind of, right? Like you also develop new social connections that you may not have met when you were in high school or junior high or at any age because you're probably with the same kind of people if you're living in the same area. And then yeah. So there's positives, but then the negative impacts can be feelings of isolation, loneliness, especially if you're moving away from a familiar support network. So there could be increased pressure for financial stuff, academic stuff. And for some people, there's a lot of fear of failure and uncertainty that comes with this independence, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know if you're going to succeed after there's a setback, right? So a lot of people really fear the setbacks, essentially. And then to navigate this, right? So along with accessing supports and developing those healthy coping skills, the one key thing is embracing flexibility and adaptability. Those are the two main things that I recommend, and kind of recognizing that the path to independence is not always linear, and acknowledge that there might be setbacks, and that is okay. It's just a way to learn.
Right, you're not making mistakes, trial and error, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because you're not expected to know it all at 18, 19, right? You're young and you haven't really experienced much, hopefully not in terms of financial and those kinds of things.
Do you think the time we're in has kind of changed or increased the pressure that you kind of put on yourselves to be independent? Even I see it, and I've far transitioned into adulthood, just what you see on social media. Right. Even if I know this is curated, I know this is just the highlights.
Yeah.
It's hard not to make comparisons.
Yeah, comparison is the thief of joy, right?
Yes,
if you're comparing, right? Yeah, if you're comparing, you will always fall short in some aspect, but it's also important to remember, the things you're seeing on social media, are those the things you truly want? Do they really align with what you want? For example, if you see all your friends getting married or engaged, do you truly want that? Or if you see your friends doing degrees, do you truly want that degree? Right. Or is it just because you're seeing it, right? So yeah, I think it's just about that self-reflection.
You brought up financial stress, and I think that is and that's going to continue to be, a significant concern for lots of young adults. How can that part of our lives, finances, how can they impact our mental well-being, and what kind of coping skills do you recommend for managing that stress?
Given the rate of global inflation, I was doing some research, and a lot of it says that young adults have put cost of living as their main concern, or as one of their top concerns, which is fair. There's a lot of that, right? And then when money problems interfere with daily life, managing day-to-day responsibilities can get really hard. And it can be challenging if you have anxiety related to money. And then money and depression can also be linked, because if there's lack of funds, that can create a negative work-life balance, right? And that can leave young adults to feel isolated or lonely, because primarily what they're doing is just coming back from work, eating, and then going to sleep, right? So the cost of living is quite high. And the ways that I recommend, the two more basic ways, is just trying to get your sleep and really prioritizing that, so that way your thoughts aren't spiraling and you have more control over your mood. And the other things would be, just moving your body. That would be the other thing that is within our control and that we can do.
So you mean exercise and physical activity and that kind of thing?
Even just, exercise, going for a 5-minute walk every day, just moving your body in some way that you find helpful, even if it's just dancing around in your living room. That's moving your body, and you're doing something nice for yourself and something fun. And then, the other thing is really learning how to budget. I know when I was definitely getting into that stage, that was a big thing where, I don't know if high schools now teach more of that, but when I was in high school, that definitely wasn't a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
But I think now that I hear from some young adults and people I know, that they're saying more and more courses are actually becoming more relevant to after high school life.
Good.
And things
that's so important.
Yeah. And even just talking to financial advisors, a lot of times that's free, and they can help you a lot in terms of paying off any loans, talking to creditors on your behalf, and kind of helping you budget and giving you information on where to invest and things like that. So that's always a good resource, I think, to go to. And then the other big one is identifying any spending triggers. Because that, like, you know, if you're getting into a fight and then going to a mall, right, to just spend, like, retail therapy is like a big thing, right? Or if you're impulse buying when you're bored, like, online shopping is so convenient now. Like, I don't know. I have my credit card number memorized because I'm always inputting it into something.
Yeah, I deleted one of those shopping apps off of my phone because I just found it way too easy. Like
Exactly.
Yeah, I was totally one of those.
Yeah, fair enough.
I would just see anything. Yeah, anything could be advertised, and you know, within seconds, it would be.
It's dangerous.
Kind of yeah, it'd be on its way. So you said spending triggers. Okay, if you're kind of coping with negative emotions by spending money, by going shopping, that kind of thing, what are some other healthier ways to kind of point that energy? Yeah. Or deal with those feelings?
Yeah, I mean, most of it is regulating emotions, right? Like if you are in a negative headspace, it's more about just taking some time to pause. And even if, let's say, impulse buying is your thing, maybe learning to leave that thing in your cart for a week, right? So that way you can decide whether or not it's worth it. A lot of times I've done that, and if it sells out, it sells out. Like, that's okay. It was just not meant to be. And then, but other times I'm like, okay, if I can live with this, like, you know, with this decision for a week and really think on it, then I'm not impulse buying.
Yeah.
Then it might be something.
It?
Then you just take some time to reflect. And then kind of picking up other coping mechanisms, right? So again, I mentioned exercise, meditation, breathing exercises, music, writing things out, talking to friends. Like, there's so many other avenues you could be taking as opposed to just pressing buy.
Yeah. I like that you gave like a big list there, because there's some things that, you know, just aren't going to resonate with people, but those aren't the only options.
For sure.
You know, like,
and there's so many more than what I just listed, right? It's just about finding what works for you.
Since the pandemic, and I mean, of course before then, but I think kind of since the pandemic, so much has happened. I mean, there's wars, there's there's like a divisive political landscape. There's so many things that we're seeing on the news that are changing our world, and young people are going to be dealing with this, right? And they're really, you know, we see a lot of young people really passionate about these social issues. So, yeah, how do you as a counselor help clients kind of process their feelings and maintain a sense of hope?
Yeah, that's a good point, because especially if you're on social media, which a lot of young adults definitely are, you're seeing a lot, maybe a lot more than, I don't know, like some of the previous, like World War I or something. Like, it wasn't that documented on phones, wasn't so accessible to kind of see.
Right.
Whereas we are seeing literally everything now. It's like right in front of us. So it can be a lot. I think the main thing to keep on maintaining the hope is, even if you feel not as much hope, I would recommend just doing your daily routine anyways. Hope blossoms in many different ways, and even in the smallest of ways. Like, even if you're watering your plant or talking to a friend, you know, like, that can bring you a sense of hope. The other things is there's always somebody in the community, organizations, local communities, charities, anything like that, that are really helping. So you know that there's good in the world. Yeah. And you see that innate goodness in human beings. And so I think reminding yourself of that, and maybe being more active in that kind of scene where you're participating in it, or those are the pages that you follow that kind of are uplifting, and doing those kinds of things and partaking in the organizations that can kind of remind you that there's efforts being made. And so this can also provide you with opportunities to engage with support, because a lot of those people in those organizations, they align with your values in some way if you're picking that organization. Mm-hmm. And so they may be able to resonate with some of what you're feeling. And I think even having just parameters around how much news you're listening to, right? You don't need to know each and every detail of what's going on. Setting kind of time for yourself to be like, okay, this is a good time for me to catch up on current events, and this is not a great time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's huge, setting those boundaries. I've definitely fallen into that trap, and I've lost sleep over it, where, you know, you're scrolling and it's just, seeing everything that's going on can really affect you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Wardah, can you talk about the importance of building up coping skills and resilience during, you know, the transition into adulthood? And, you know, maybe if you have any like specific techniques or practices that you think are really effective?
Yeah, I think at any age, developing coping skills and resilience is key. But especially in this one, the like young adulthood stage, like I think making connections, that's a big one. A lot of people sometimes don't know how to do that because either they've been on screens from a young age and they don't, like the face-to-face interaction is not there. So I would always recommend highly having those face-to-face interactions and learning skills like empathy and listening skills. Those are huge when you're maintaining connections and things like that. And when you maintain connections, that's a sign of resiliency because you can rely upon these people to comfort you in times of need.
So if you're working with a client that's having a hard time with that, you know, making those social connections, what kinds of, you know, exercises or ways of practicing that do you encourage them to do?
So I do encourage them trying to talk to somebody new at least once a month, like whether that be at school in a safe environment, not necessarily just online with a stranger.
Yeah.
Definitely be safe around those kinds of things. but yeah, like somebody you know or a mutual friend or in some way just kind of coming up with icebreaker questions, right? Like that's also another really good one so that you can ask these people those things.
Right.
And then the other part is genuinely just trying to be curious about another human being is such an important thing. Like it's like you're talking to somebody with goals, hopes, dreams, passions, right?
Yeah.
Pain. And so I think getting to know someone in an authentic way, that's a big deal.
I've always found that, like, if if you're nervous about talking to people, just asking them questions, because we love talking about
Everyone
ourselves.
loves talking about themselves. Yeah. So and that's a common theme that you see. And then the other part is I also recommend like local kind of meetups. That happens a lot these days. So even
and you can find them for like any interest.
Like if you like photography or if you like hiking or if you like art, like just anything, there's probably a meetup for it. And because you would already have a commonality even before you get there,
right?
It's just an easy way to feel included, and appreciated.
Sense of belonging, for sure.
Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
So I remember when I was in my 20s, and I mean, still now there's that feeling like there's this pressure to kind of follow a certain path and hit these certain milestones. Like, you graduate high school, you go to university, you find someone to be with, you get married, you buy a house, you do all these things, and in this order. So how do you address like the pressure to achieve these milestones? What advice do you give to young people who kind of may feel overwhelmed by all those?
I mean, milestone anxiety is a real thing. A lot of times I feel like when our age group now, like, well, not ours, but the age group younger than us, when they look with these milestones, they just kind of see their parents, right? Like we see that our parents got a house at a certain age or had kids at a certain age or finished their degree at a certain age. And I think what we fail to realize is there's a huge generation gap. Like you cannot kind of follow these same steps now, right? It's going to look different for everybody. It was an easier time back then too. Like prices were more affordable for houses, right. Job stability was there more. And social media didn't add that pressure as well a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like back then it wasn't really so much about appearances or you weren't really aware of what you were lacking maybe.
Right.
Because you didn't see it, like you were happy with what you had.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think looking at that and then trying to become friends, I guess, with your inner critic, that's a big one. Is just trying to find ways to relate to it or even challenging what it's saying, right? Like a lot of our thoughts, we don't have to listen to them.
Yeah,
if your
they're
thoughts
not all
are
true.
very negative, like that's your cue to be like, you know what? Like I need to put an end to this thought and I don't need to listen to what it's saying because it's not true what it's saying.
And I get it. Like these pressures, I mean, we want to belong. We want to feel normal and that, you know, our life choices are kind of in line with what, you know, generally people do. But I think it's important to remind ourselves that it's totally okay to be different and to not do what, you know, most other people are doing. And
going back to our like previous conversation is like, you know, do you even want those things, right? Like, and reaching a certain milestone doesn't automatically equate to happiness all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Right? Like just because you finished a degree doesn't mean you'll be your happiest, or just because you get a certain job doesn't mean you'll be your happiest. It's a lot of inner work that we have to do to be happy, right? And it's people always chasing a certain thing, like, oh, when I go on vacation, I'll be happy because things are so miserable, or, you know, but you could be miserable by a beach. Like you could, if you're not working on yourself. You totally
and
could.
you can be happy at home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, trying to find the small joys in life.
And what role do family and friends play in improving mental health for young adults?
There's a huge role because, they're people who you're surrounded with. They kind of form your ideas, or you can bounce ideas off of them. And there's different kind of supports that I recommend. So there's emotional supports, which could be people who just comfort you in times of needs. And then there's more practical assistance, like a guidance counselor or an academic counselor or a financial advisor. That's more practical supports. And emotional supports could also be a therapist or a psychologist or a counselor or a life coach or a mentor, like anything like that. Those are such key things to have placed in your life, because there are people who have experiences that you don't have yet because you're young. And it's important to kind of call upon other people's wisdom or experience, right? To kind of be like, okay, this is what they did. It may not fit right with me, but at least I know it worked or didn't work for them.
Yeah.
Right. I remember when I was trying to go into the field I was trying to go into, I would talk to a lot of professionals in that field who have already gone through that process. And even today, there's so many people that message me on some of the professional platforms to reach out to say, like, hey, I'm doing this master's. Like, how did you get through it? Or could you please walk me through what the hours were like and what the coursework was like? You know, even though everyone's busy, I never mind any questions like that. I will always make time to answer and support anybody who's hasn't experienced what I've experienced.
Yeah, exactly. That makes so much sense. And like what you said, like it's encouraged and normal and great to reach out to financial advisors, career advisors, all that. So we should have the same kind of mindset around counseling and reaching out for help that way. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
You do not have to do it alone.
No.
Necessarily.
Yeah. And kind of approaching it with like that mindset of curiosity. Like, I don't know this about my finances, so I'm going to ask a financial. I have some questions about my mental health and how I can handle it better, so I'm reaching out to a counselor. It's not, it shouldn't be viewed as like there's something wrong with you or that, you know, you're broken or anything like that. It's just, you know, getting a little help.
It's like taking a car to the mechanic. Like, we all need tune-ups
and
support. And if you have those things, then you will bounce back from really hard things quicker.
Yeah.
If you don't have those things, then those things can really weigh you down.
Right. So in your work as a counselor, how do you help young adults kind of identify and set, you know, realistic goals for themselves?
I think the one thing that I mentioned before, too, is self-reflection. That's a big thing, because that'll encourage you to gain clarity about your own values, interests, priorities. Like, everyone has different things, right? Your goals should be unique to you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, this is a very common one, but it's called SMART goals.
Yeah.
So setting SMART goals. So SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so even like, let's say if your goal is to finish a degree, then breaking that down into very achievable small pieces, as in like go into class, you know, that's going to get you to your goal of getting a degree. Or if it's job hunting, then maybe applying to 1 or 2 jobs every day. And that way you can celebrate some of the smaller accomplishments and goals as you go along, as opposed to waiting for something huge to happen.
Right.
And then celebrating or not. Some people don't even do that. So I think, both professional and personal goals are needed to kind of maintain a great work balance. But like you having more actionable steps helps make progress more manageable.
Yeah. And physically writing it down and having something in front of you that's really clear can help, because if a goal is really vague or not defined, then you don't really know if you've got there. Yeah. Like, I want to work out more. Well, what does that mean?
Specifically, yeah. It could mean like 1 day a week or 2 days a week, right?
Yeah.
You have to be really specific.
Yeah, and what's a workout?
Yeah.
And
how long? And so even I think people set a lot of like New Year's resolutions as goals, which is great if you believe in New Year's resolutions. But I think what's needed more is like maybe doing like a quarterly resolution, like a 3-month resolution for the year. And then that way every 3 months you can reevaluate your goals. Because that's another big thing is people set goals, things happen, chaos ensues, and then they're disappointed that they didn't reach that goal. So it is okay to remeasure, reevaluate, pause and see, okay, now that I know all these things, is this goal still a right fit for me? Right. So let's say you go into a certain program in a degree and then you realize it's terrible, like I did with chemistry. So like I was like, no, this is not for me. Right.
Yeah,
so then reevaluated. And now obviously I'm not a chemical engineer or something.
Yeah. Right? Like, how can we differentiate between, normal stressors? Because, not every day is going to be sunshine and rainbows. Like how can we differentiate between normal stressors and worries versus signs of something, a little more serious or concerning around our mental health?
Yeah, so there's different types of stresses. There is productive stress that kind of motivates us. It's short term. It could include academic or career-related stress, financial stress, relationship challenges, any kind of life transitions, responsibilities, like it can include a lot, right? Those are still considered normal stresses. But if there's persistence in those stresses, so they're not going away, they're not short term, you aren't getting a chance to recover in between stresses, and they're becoming kind of chronic. There's persistent sadness or anxiety. You notice a significant change in your appetite or sleep, huge weight loss or weight gain, reliance excessively on alcohol or substances like that. Or if you have thoughts of suicide or self-harm,
right,
that is definitely cues for you to be like, you know what, like I need help and I need to reach out.
Yeah.
But if you're able to cope and if things are, like they're short term and manageable and in small pieces that you can kind of cope with as they come, amazing. But if it's affecting your quality of life and your relationships and your career negatively, then you need to reach out. Yeah,
it's so important.
Yeah.
So we mentioned in the beginning that, adulthood, it involves just a lot of transitions. That can be to a new school, a new job, new city, whatever that may be. How do you support clients and how do you recommend people support themselves in kind of managing these transitions while maintaining their mental health?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome can rear its head a lot in these situations.
Totally.
Like that usually comes up, especially if you're in a new job, new career, and you feel inexperienced. But always remembering, like, you got to start somewhere. It's more about that self-reflection, self-awareness, training, getting that feedback that always helps. Right?
Yeah, and taking that pressure off of ourselves of being perfect.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not going to happen.
There is no such thing as perfection. Because who has set these goals? It's usually either ourselves or maybe somewhat society, but even society isn't reaching their own expectations.
Exactly. So with everything, that we've got going on in our lives, it can be overwhelming. Yeah. So how do we balance all that?
The first thing I usually say to that is just because you have free time doesn't mean you're available.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a big thing. It's like a lot of times people assume like, oh, you have the weekend free. That means, you can meet up with us or you can come here, this location. And I'm like, well, what if I just wanted the weekend to do nothing?
Yeah.
Right.
Doing nothing is really underrated.
It's really underrated. And rest is so productive. Like if you are not resting, if you're being like, if you're go, which is like, that is sometimes rest is not an option or is lesser of a priority, but you don't need like hours of rest on end, right?
Yeah.
Like you just need at least 15 to 20 minutes for yourself where, maybe if you even just sit in your car in your driveway and not walk into your chaotic home,
Yeah.
right? Like just do that, to take a few deep breaths and listen to some nice music and then go in. Right? Like even that is considered rest and productive, right? Like sometimes I don't have time to nap, but I'll just go lay in the dark for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I just want no stimulation. Like I'm not on my phone.
Yeah.
Just for 15 minutes, I'll set like an alarm. So if I do nap, like I'm not napping so much. And then that's it. Like that's rejuvenating enough that I can carry on with the rest of the day.
I can totally relate. I think we consume so much.
Yeah.
Like, we're reading all the time. We're looking at all these videos. We're answering emails. We're talking, like, just so much consumption. Yeah. So just like, even just sitting quietly outside, not taking anything in, like we need to do that to kind of recharge a bit.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just little tidbits in your day. Even in your work day, if you're able to just take 5 minutes where you're just drinking water and staring out into space and not doing anything else.
Yeah.
If that's an option, then do that. You're going to find that if you do that, you're not so exhausted after work.
So we touched on this briefly, but I want to get into a bit more of like the impact of social media and technology and all this screen time on the mental health of young adults. What's been your experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this actually came up as a topic in our last week's staff meeting.
Yeah.
And one of my coworkers here, she went to do a training on social media use. And there were some very interesting tips and statistics that she was telling us about. And a lot of it is like, there's a huge increase in social media use ever since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's linked to an increase in anxiety and depression.
And why is that? Is it kind of what we had talked about? Like, the comparison?
Like comparisons, different portrayals, or a lot of times when we're using social media or anything like that, it could be for avoidance as well.
Yeah.
Like unless you're actively, like, let's say if you have a gaming platform where you're talking with all your friends, that's not avoidance. That you're connecting based off personal interests, right? But if you're just scrolling through something, that's quite disconnected, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not really connecting unless, it's scrolling through your friends' stuff, right? Then you can like those things and develop those connections, but it's still very passive connections.
Right.
It's not, it's not real-time connections. And so that, even though we're more connected than ever, there's still a lot of disconnect. And that is causing depression and anxiety in young adults, especially.
So how do we cope with that? How do we set boundaries for ourselves around these technologies? How do we? What if young adults don't even recognize that it is causing these negative feelings? Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing is the boundaries that you talked about, right? And that can be developed by, like, I have a smartphone, right? And on there, I can track my screen time. And every Sunday, it sends me a notification as to what my screen time was, whether it was up from last week, whether it was down, how many, like I can track my daily screen time as well, what apps I'm specifically spending time on.
Yeah.
If you're listening to podcasts, that's educational, right? Then you can kind of ignore that side of things, right? But if it says like TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, like, and those are primarily what you're using, then that's concerning, right? And the other thing that was recommended when we were talking in our staff meeting is changing your phone to grayscale.
Yeah, I've heard this.
Yeah. So like, because a lot of times when we're looking at things, like for me, it's colors, right? Like that's what I pay attention to, and that's what most people do as well. But if you're changing your phone display to grayscale, like black and white, you're not going to be visually stimulated.
Yeah, it'll be a lot less engaging.
A lot less engaging. And so I tried it after that staff meeting for a day. I had it on grayscale. My screen time was a lot less.
Really?
Because I didn't even like picking up my phone and even just looking at my phone background. Like I was just like, dull. Ew. Like, why does it look like that, right? Like it was just so boring and unstimulating. And so I think sometimes we just need that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other thing is also, like noticing what kind of content you're consuming, right? Yeah. It's fine if you're on TikTok, right? A lot of times on TikTok, I'll get great ideas for recipes, like house decor, like things like that. I think curating your feed, right? Yeah. Like maybe following very inspiring people. Or people that you look up to as role models instead
or that are putting out, positive content for sure. I do like how, some of these apps that you have that capability to say, yes, I want to see more of this. No, I want to see less of this. And
exactly. So you can say that now and pick and choose. And then you can also limit your notifications. So a lot of times we can go into settings and pick every app and select like no notifications. If we're not getting it, we're less likely to pick it up.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And then also the do not disturb function is a big one, right? Yeah. Like if you know you need to study or do something or get something done, just having your phone on that, people can still reach you in emergencies. But at least your phone screen's not lighting up like every 2 minutes because there's a notification.
Yeah, totally. And you don't even really realize how much it can impact you. Like just that little ding, it's like, well, I've got to check it.
You got to check it. Yeah, my phone is eternally on silent.
I'm terrible with that in emails. It's like I can be really focusing on something, but I'll hear that ding and it's like, well, I have to see what's going on.
Attend to it. Yeah. I get that.
Yeah. So Wardah, we talked about how unpredictable and, ever-changing the world is and is becoming. So how do we address, these feelings of uncertainty or fear about the future that, a lot of young adults are experiencing?
I would say to normalize those feelings and validate them because it's okay to feel uncertain about things. It's okay to experience feeling lost and sad and alone. Those are not negative things. They're just uncomfortable emotions. They're not negative as they're painted.
That's a really important differentiator, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like just because it's unpleasant
doesn't mean you don't want to experience it or don't need to experience it, right? Because at the end of the day, our emotions point to certain things and they motivate us. They kind of guide how we do things, how we, if something feels wrong, trusting your gut instinct is an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, if you're sad, if you're angry, that doesn't mean you have to put a stop to it. You should listen to it.
Yeah, it's more tuning into it and, like you said, listening to it and then kind of figuring out what that emotion needs from you, right? Like if you're feeling disconnected, that emotion's telling you to connect with somebody, right? That's your option. If you're feeling hopelessness, that's your cue to how do you find hope? What are things that bring you hope, right? What values do you have in place in your life that bring your life a little bit more meaning?
Yeah.
Right? So it's just more slowing down and really listening to those emotions. And knowing that uncertainty doesn't mean, like if you're feeling uncertainty, that's not a cue to stop doing something, right? Like for example, if you were in school and you were uncertain about what happens on a test, which most of us always are because we don't know all the test answers, right?
Yeah.
Like test can be a surprise thing, right? So it's kind of like that didn't stop you from writing that test or, for some people at least that didn't. And if it is stopping you, that's a concern because that means there's avoidance with those emotions, right? As opposed to kind of, steering into it and kind of letting it happen and tolerating that and like uncertainty and fear, that's a big thing.
That's been huge in my own counseling is this idea of uncertainty because I want certainty so bad. It's like, well, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
I mean,
knowing everything, there is a huge con to that.
It's true.
It's actually a really good thing to say, I don't know.
Yeah. And what you said about tolerating that uncertainty, I think that's a skill that a lot of us can benefit from building.
Yeah. And kind of giving yourself more credit right? Like we dealt with a pandemic that was highly uncertain.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And we made it out of it. Like we developed coping strategies. We learned to connect in different ways. You know, some people really struggled through it, of course. But yeah, they're like either way, there's people that made it out of it. And that can just point to our resiliency as human beings.
For sure.
Right? To say that we can go through incredibly unpredictable things and still be okay.
And just looking back at like all, like on an individual level, looking back at your own accomplishments or like how you handled hard situations, like, you know, you got through that breakup or you lost that job and that sucked, but you know,
you're okay.
Yeah.
I think it's tolerating the what ifs, right? Like a lot of time people will be like, well, what if this bad thing happens? But it's like, if what ifs is going to hold you back, right? Then that's your cue to seek out some support, because a lot of things will entail the what if, right? But what if it's the best thing to ever happen?
For sure.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions here, Wardah. How do you encourage young adults to kind of build up a practice of self-compassion and kind of embrace that imperfection that we've talked about as they kind of go through these adult challenges?
Yeah. Well, I think normalizing imperfections is the big thing. It's a natural part of our human experience. We're not meant to be perfect beings in any means. And like I said, I don't believe there's anything such as perfect. It's, you know, like embracing that a lot of things we set for ourselves and put pressure on ourselves for. And then the other thing is the way you talk to yourself and treat yourself really matters. Like if you're always being rude to yourself, like what if you said that to a loved one? What if our internal thoughts, we verbalize them to our loved ones? Would they still want to be part of our lives?
Yeah.
Maybe not, because they would be like, how could you be so mean?
I hear that a lot, like talk to yourself the way you would a friend.
Yeah.
And it had become kind of cliche, but so much more now, like it's really resonating with me.
Yeah.
And I was, talking to my own therapist about this kind of thing. And she suggested like, just go like over the top, just be so nice to yourself that, it's almost silly. Like you made the best peanut butter sandwich. Like that was so great, Catherine. And I'm actually finding that it's helping. Yeah.
It's just a way to retrain our brain, right? Like we don't have to talk to ourselves that way. Like we don't deserve that. We deserve all the love and kindness. We haven't done anything so bad to be not worthy of respect and kindness. Everyone should be getting respect in this world. Yeah. Right? Everyone has dignity. Everyone has rights. And so treating yourself in that way is also a good thing. Yeah. Right?
So what resources or supports do you recommend for young adults who might be struggling with their mental health, but, might be unsure of where to turn?
So the biggest one is 211. Like if you dial 211 on your phone, that's a huge resource line, at least in Alberta. For other areas that may look different, but if you call it, it's 24/7. It can give you a lot of legal, financial, housing, mental health resources, just a bunch of different things that you could look into. And same thing, like if you're struggling to buy groceries, like there's a lot of resources that 211 in itself would have for like free delivery. And, you don't even have to drive to go pick it up. Like they just bring it to your door. So there's a lot out there, but 211 is a big one. Talking to your family doctor or any doctor, just like going for routine checkups and seeing what they recommend as well. And then Distress Center is always available in Calgary as a resource. If you just type in Distress Center on Google, you will find their information and the number to call, and it's a 24/7 kind of number. You don't necessarily have to call them when you're in crisis. You could call them at any time. And they're really responsive and receptive and supportive. And then lastly would be even just our agency. Like there's something for every person with every kind of income. And so our fees are based on sliding scale. And so reach out if you need it, because fee should never be a barrier to access any resources.
Thank you so much, Wardah, for taking the time to talk about this today.
Yeah, it was lovely to chat.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out the show notes for a list of Alberta resources mentioned in this episode. This episode was produced by Nick Here, Louisa Campos, Jenna Forbes, and by me, Catherine Hartig. A special thanks to Wardah Elahi. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Centre and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. Calgary Counseling Centre and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling for anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.